Hello, welcome to this presentation. My name is Fergal Anderson and I'm from Talamh Bio, and I'm going to be talking about those three things, La Via Campesina, food sovereignty, and agroecology. Now, they're not three things that we're particularly familiar with as concepts in Ireland, and that's why I suppose we're trying to, raise awareness of what they mean and where we're coming from when we're talking about those three things. The first one, well, sorry, all three of them in a nutshell. So the first, La Via Campesina, what is it exactly? La Via Campesina is a farmers' movement, an international farmers' movement, with more than 700 million members worldwide. It's a global movement of farmers, and they have a European branch, which is the European Coordination Via Campesina, and Talamh Bio are a member of that. So when you're joining Talamh Bio, which is our farmers' organisation here in Ireland, you're also joining that European organisation and the international movement, La Via Campesina. So La Via Campesina was established in the 1990s, and they have created a space for farmers from different countries to interact and exchange and develop a set of shared principles and proposals. And two of the key kind of foundation stones of that set of proposals are food sovereignty and agroecology. So firstly, food sovereignty. Well, what is food sovereignty? Food sovereignty is essentially about a democratization, I suppose. It's about the rights of people to define their own food and agricultural systems. That means rethinking how we organize production, trade, and distribution of food globally. Now, there's a lot of criticism internationally over the last 60, 70 years about how those systems have evolved and developed, and about the corporate control that now exists there. And people are asking themselves whether their food and agricultural systems are run for profit or for the benefit of people and communities. And that's something, I suppose, that food sovereignty seeks to address. It tries to put farmers and citizens at the center of decision making about food sovereignty, about food policies and agricultural policies, and about ensuring that the decisions that we make around our food system are beneficial to communities and people rather than private corporations. Another very important element of food sovereignty is agroecology, and one can't really exist without the other. And agroecology is about, in a nutshell, I suppose, farming within natural processes and ecosystems, so farming with nature rather than against it. But it's not just a simple set of technical principles about how we farm. It also incorporates that broader questions about society. What kind of farming models do we have in our communities? What kind of where do we hold the knowledge about food and farming in society? So it's not just a set of principles, as I said, about a technical question. It's also a question which attempts to address the social, cultural aspects of farming too. And I think that's what makes it slightly different. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail later. So, where did the Via Campesina come from? So the Via Campesina emerged in the 1990s, mostly as a response to kind of attempts to globalize trade in agricultural goods and commodities through the World Trade Organization. That followed, I suppose, in the 1990s, we already had seen the spread of conventional farming systems across Europe and North America, particularly following the end of the Second World War. And those conventional farming systems specialize in specific areas. They narrow production to one crop generally per farm, and increase specialization and inputs for that crop. It has this kind of approach which, as always, I almost take a philosophical approach where you find a factor which limits the productivity, use a technology or an input to overcome that factor, and you continue to produce. So it's very much based on a concept of increasing production and increasing the volume of production as a commodity crop internationally. The last thing, I suppose, which is the foundation of that conventional food and farming system is this idea of comparative advantage, which says that we should produce whatever it's cheapest to produce wherever it's cheapest to do so. In a nutshell, again, that I suppose means that wherever it's easiest to produce grapes or fruit, you do it in the place where it's easiest to do so climatically. But not just climatically, because as you're always looking to reduce costs, maybe it's a question of labor, where your labor costs are lowest. And that's where you see examples like tomatoes being produced industrially at an industrial scale in the south of Spain for the European market, using migrant or undocumented labor, and all the other contradictions that exist in the food system, where specialization has just led to a race to the bottom in terms of, could be labor rights, could be production values, could be land use, could be soil health. And anytime you arrive at the bottom, you hope that there's a techno fix that will get you out of that situation. So those companies that represent and organize and function within this system continue down that path as long as they can. So what's the impact of that on farming cultures? Well, if you look at that picture internationally, where you have a concentration of different productions in different areas, soya in Latin America, for example, it could be cotton in other particular parts of the world, wheat in other sections of the world, you will have a reduction in farming cultures and agrobiodiversity because you're producing less crops of different kinds in those areas. And you're increasing the specialization, increasing the monoculture. So there's a destruction of those integrated farming systems, which would be interdependent in those spaces. And that also leads to a kind of homogenization of what people eat internationally, leading to the point where we have 12 plant species and 5 animals providing 70% of the world's food. We know that strength is in diversity, and this system tends us to move in the opposite direction. So La Via Campesina, the first meetings they had were in 1992, 1993, and it was the first chance, I suppose, that farmers had the opportunity to sit down together and discuss the issues that they were facing. And ironically, I mean, one would think that the problems facing a farmer in the global south or the global north would be very, very different, but essentially they kind of understood those problems and saw the commonalities between them. Because what was happening in the global north and in the global south is that conventional model of agriculture was eradicating the kind of rural life or rural cultures that existed in both those parts of the world. So there was solidarity was founded. They found solidarity with each other, with a shared understanding of the impacts of that model, and as opposed to looking to compete with one another, they said, well, how can we cooperate? And out of that cooperation came that concept of food sovereignty, which was launched in 1996 at the World Food Summit. And it was launched partly to kind of counteract the idea of food security, which is a very limiting concept. Food security really just talks about access to food. It doesn't talk at any point about the social, environmental, costs of that food production, and so you can be completely food secure within a prison, for example, which would be an extreme example, but a completely logical one. And La Via Campesina built their vision of food sovereignty by meeting together and by mobilizing. And they mobilized against the World Trade Organization, which was trying to create a global framework for agricultural trade during that period, and proposed their alternative, which was food sovereignty. So the first meetings in 2003, one of the first mobilizations, big mobilization against the World Trade Organization in 2003. Another one in 2005 in Hong Kong. So wherever the World Trade Organization went around the world, Via Campesina would follow, and they would demand that their voices, the voices of farmers from both the north and south, be heard in that debate instead of the voices of corporations or private companies. So Via Campesina has grown. There's now 182 organizations in 81 countries. Actually, this map is slightly out of date. There's even more because we've joined since then, Talib Dio, and you can see that there's also a member in the UK, the Land Workers Alliance. So there's more organizations even than are mentioned on this map. But that gives you a picture of the kind of international flavor of the organization and kind of the breadth. There's grain farmers from Canada in there. There's coffee growers in Costa Rica. There's people growing hazelnuts in Turkey. There's Indian farmers. There's Talib Dio. So you have a very broad cross section of the world's population, I suppose, involved in agriculture within Via Campesina.